All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Healthy Community Trees webinar presented by the Growing Diversity Project. This session is being recorded and streamed on Facebook, so please mute your mics during the presentation, and if you do not want to be recorded, you can turn off your camera. Growing Diversity is a partnership between the Woodland Trust and Fellowship of the Trees and is funded by the Forestry Commission through the Tree Production Innovation Fund. And we aim to support community tree nurseries in England by delivering training and events supported by industry experts and producing resources focused on hard-to-grow species and under-sourced seed provenances. I'm going to pop some links into the chat for our upcoming events in February, which will have a biosecurity focus. We have a webinar and a face-to-face event hosted by More Trees in Dartmoor. So for tonight's webinar, I would like to introduce Rebecca Gosling, who is the lead policy advocate for tree health and invasive species at the Woodland Trust. And in previous roles in the Trust, she's delivered pest and pathogen training to observatory volunteers, staff and community tree nurseries in Wales. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to add questions to the chat during the presentation, or you can raise your hand at the end. I'm also going to pop a little bit of information into the chat about a grant that we've just opened up for community tree nurseries. It's an advanced £500 payment to support the aims of the project. But I will hand over to you now, Rebecca.
Thanks, Gemma. Hi, everyone. So what I'll do is just quickly share my slides and then we can get going. So this is the bit where I go, can you see it? And everyone hopefully says yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Hi, thanks for joining. I'm Rebecca, and as Gemma has very nicely introduced me, I work at the Woodland Trust. I've had quite a few different roles at the Trust in tree health, looking at citizen science, working in our science, evidence and research department, and also now as a policy advocate. So what am I going to talk to you about today? Hopefully I won't go on for too long. I'll keep an eye on the time, and I know I can talk fast as well, so I will try and slow down. It's just because I get all excited talking about trees and go really fast. So what I'm going to cover is I'm going to cover some of the basic signs and symptoms of ill health in trees. So what to look out for when you're out in the field, whether it be collecting seeds, finding material, propagation material, whether you are in your nursery and you're trying to identify signs and symptoms of ill health within your trees there. I will focus on mature trees. This is my specialist area, but I'm going to include some examples and photos of saplings as well. But again, the symptoms were very much the same, just smaller when you're in a nursery environment. I'm going to look at pests and pathogens of hard-to-grow species, as this is what the Growing Diversity Project is focusing on. So some for Gilder Rose and Holly, Yew, Hazel, for example. And then I'm going to go on to how to report your findings and signpost you on to further resources, because there's only so much I can cover in this relatively short session. So I want to make sure that you go away feeling equipped and you know where to go to find out more. So the first thing I tend to cover is why. Why should you be bothered about identifying poor health or signs and symptoms of pest or pathogen within trees? For your own personal biosecurity, so if you're in a site where you're seeing lots of disease, you might want to wash your boots before you leave. You don't want to spread that disease with you. For your nursery biosecurity, so some of these pathogens I've talked about today can be seed-borne. So you could, if you took seeds from sick trees, you could be taking the pathogen with you into your nursery. And a key pathway of spread of these pests and pathogens is via infected trees. So the more we know of how to identify them, or just to know when something is wrong within that tree, we can then take measures to implement good biosecurity to stop them spreading. And I know some of the future webinars will talk about what that biosecurity is and how it will look and how you can implement it. So today I'm really just going to focus on the identification of ill health. So let's go. I'm going to go on to a lot of photos, but just a quick slide really to summarize some of the signs and symptoms of ill health that I'm going to discuss in the next slides. So we're looking at kind of that crown reduction, discoloured leaves and wilting, bleeds and cankers, bark loss, cracking, and a lot of these might mean nothing to you at the moment, but I'm going to show you a lot of photos. The bottom of this slide kind of points out a really key thing. So if you're coming to report a tree, and we'll talk about reporting them at the end if you find a tree you're worried about in the field, some key things that you want to know is, are the symptoms on the new foliage? Are they on the older foliage? Are you seeing one tree that's showing these symptoms? Are you seeing many? And are those trees all in one cluster, or are they kind of randomly distributed around the area? So they can really help us identify what might be going on within the tree. So what we're looking for when it comes to ill health, and it's important to note as well here that not all of these symptoms will necessarily suddenly go, okay, the tree has a disease. Lots of different things can cause ill health within a tree. Abiotic symptoms such as drought, we've just had the big storms, waterlogging, if the roots are sat in water for a really long time, and all of these different things, compaction, if you're in kind of a site that has a lot of people and a lot of activity, can also influence the health of a tree. So it's also always important to check it out and read the books and reporting as further. So crown reduction is a key one. So this is where we see quite a lot of loss within the foliage, within the crown of the tree. And this one's one of the classics that we see sadly quite widely across our countryside now. This is ash dieback. Again, some more crown reduction, this time in a plane tree. I believe this is plain wilt, which we don't currently have in the UK, but you can see this is what we mean by crown reduction, this kind of real dramatic loss of crown that you wouldn't normally expect to see at that time of year. So in the height of summer, if you're finding there's a broadleaf tree that is showing quite significant crown loss, then that could be a symptom of ill health. Discoloured needles, so we're onto a conifer tree here. So if the colours are going very orangey in evergreen conifer trees, so not in larch in autumn, because it would do this anyway, but in those evergreen, if you see symptoms like this all year round, you'd be concerned. And you can see the differences in how they're distributed here. So the whole tree has had these discoloured needles, whereas on the left it's got all these patchy bits, and that's where we're looking for that kind of difference in description. And this one's actually been caused by a Phytophthora pathogen that I'll talk about a bit more later. I'll mention Phytophthora. This is Phytophthora laterialis, and it's a root pathogen. So actually impacts here are going on in the roots, but we're seeing the symptoms above ground later on. So the infection is at quite an advanced stage for this one. But don't worry too much about the specific pests and pathogens, just giving you some examples really of what these symptoms can look like. Discoloration can also be kind of, I guess, on top of the leaves in this instance. So this is powdery mildew, which is a fungus species that will grow on top of the leaf, and it's turning oak leaves white. And you can see this quite prevalent towards the end of the summer. And this one on the right is quite severe. So again, we're seeing this kind of colour we wouldn't normally expect to see on the tree. Leaf spots as well. I won't worry about every single bit of spotting or necrosis you might see on a leaf. It can happen. They're not all going to look perfect and unnibbled and you know, with no blemishes. However, if you're seeing it quite prevalent across the tree, maybe in combination with that crown reduction, then we would maybe start to investigate a little further. So on the left, you see these like necrotic patches, which just means patches that have died on the leaf. And this is where the fungal spore of ash dieback has landed on the leaf, and then is going in and acting as it does as a pathogen. So what we see quite regularly actually is if you've got a fungal pathogen, is you can see these very regular brown spots across the leaves where the spore has landed, and then the fungus is then grown into the leaf and is causing this necrosis as a result. On the right is rust, if I'm allowed to say. It's one of my favourite pathogens of trees. It produces, and there's loads and loads of different species of rust. It's another fungal species, produces all these kind of orangey, characteristic orange spots. And at certain times of year, if you turn a leaf over, depending on the type of rust, some of them have life stages where they grow this fruiting body that looks almost like a spider legs coming out the back. It's fascinating. And some of them even like explode out the stomata, and if you get them under a microscope, they look great. So again, these kind of quite prevalent and dramatic spottings can be another cause for concern. I've got another example here, discoloured needles. This is Dophostroma needle blight, and this is a good example of where we're asking, okay, are you seeing these symptoms on newer or older foliage? So in pines, if you're seeing these symptoms on the old foliage, so you can see here we've got the first year, the most recent year of needle growth is still quite green at the ends, but then all the needle growth behind is dying, and that's really characteristic of this disease, this pathogen. So this is why it's important to record that kind of information when you're in the field. And again, just another example of kind of discoloured needles, and quite dramatic as well. So we're not, thinking about, okay, there's a 1 or 2 discoloured needles, or sometimes if it's at the ends, it can be frost and stuff like that. We're looking for, is there quite dramatic symptoms that we need to worry about that we think will affect the health of that tree. And then wilting. So if you've got a pathogen within a tree, it will be growing inside. So what makes them pathogens? They go in and they grow inside the tree. They use the nutrients within the tree to grow themselves. And basically what it will do is it will block the vessels that transport the water and the nutrients around the tree. And if it gets to the point where it's starting to really block that water movement, you'll get this wilting at the ends. This can also be happen in drought, so not necessarily always caused by a pathogen. But this one is Pseudococcus sugi on a cedar, and on blue atlas cedar, it turns the needles pink, and you can see that in these photos as well. So again, quite characteristic. But this photo is also a very good example of wilting, where it's blocking those water conducting vessels now and stopping water getting to the end of those shoots, and it's causing them to wilt. A few kind of symptoms of pests now is leaf miners. And one that we see across our country now, sadly, is horse chestnut leaf miner. And I put these photos up just to kind of try and describe what leaf miner damage looks like. So, and how it might be different from the necrotic spotting that I showed you in an earlier slide with the rust and ash dieback. So with a leaf miner, from that kind of image on the left, you might think it's that necrotic spotting. There might be a fungus or something, but actually it's very different as you kind of get close. And what it will be like, and I've heard it described as a bit like a sandwich. So the leaf miner larvae, which are very, very small, they'll be in between the kind of top layer of cells of the leaf on the top and the bottom, and they'll be eating through the middle. So they're kind of leaving the bread and eating the filling almost. And what will best way to do is if you took this leaf off and you held it up to the sun, to the light, you would see the little larvae, and it's frass, which it's a fancy word for its poo. You would see that inside, and that's how you can normally tell the difference. And I've included these photos of holly as well, because there is a holly leaf miner that you might see a lot, and I'm aware that's one of the species that this project is focusing on. And it's been quite prevalent as well. So this photo on the bottom, you can see there's loads of damage on this tree. And when I first saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening there? And then I got to leaves and lifted them up, and it's leaf miner, just a real bad kind of case of the leaf miner there. It's not one that you would carry on seeds because they tend to stick within the foliage, but it's one to be aware of for your biosecurity measures for sure. And then bleeds. If I'm allowed to say, one of my favourite symptoms to find is a good bleed. That's what everyone at Tree Health likes to see for our own fascination, not for the trees. Bleeds can look very different, and it tends to present itself as kind of this, on broadleaves anyway, is this kind of darkened black weeping, which can be down the side of the trunk, but you can also get them on the stems as well. And what this is again, it's a pathogen, it's underneath the bark and it's causing dieback necrosis as it's moving its way through the cambium and the phloem layer just underneath the bark. And that is what's causing these bleeds. So if you cut under the bark here, wouldn't suggest that unless it's your tree and you want to find out. But if you cut underneath the bark, you would see a lot of dead tissue, which is called a lesion. And you can see these in summer. So normally in summer, when the tree is more active, they will actively weep, and you can sometimes see the weeping coming out. And it's quite a sugary substance sometimes, so hornets will buzz around it. And then in the winter, maybe, or at times of the year like spring and autumn, the bleeds can dry out, and you'll just be left with these darker patches. And sometimes they can dry up and be harder to see. And then, so you can see here these black bits on this tree on the left, and in the middle, that's quite a severe symptom. Lots of bleeding going on there. A lot of the time you'll only find one kind of small patch, I hope. On the right is a slightly different kind of bleed. It's still kind of presenting this black coloration, but what it will do is it's called, this is a phytophthora bleed, and it's called people call it water staining or ink marks, because instead of coming out between the cracks in the bark, it will just kind of like spread, like someone splodged ink on it and kind of like weep across. And that's quite typical of a phytophthora kind of bleed, which I'll talk more about in more detail in a minute. And then another sign and symptom to look out for is resin bleeds. So in conifers, you will see a resin bleed typically, rather than that darker colour, because conifers produce resin as part of their defence mechanism. These can present like these ones on the left that are a bit gross. These are kind of resin tubes, and this is where a beetle, a particularly large one, for a bark beetle anyway here, has burrowed into the tree, and as it's burrowing in, it's pushing the resin with its legs back and forming these kind of tubes. So that could indicate that you've actually got some bark beetle activity under the bark there. And I think that is great spruce bark beetle, that photo. And then on the other side, again, you've got these kind of real obvious white resin bleeds. In conifers, this isn't always something to worry about. Not wanting to sound, I don't want to be too technical, but so sometimes they just do it. If their side shoots get knocked off, or they're under a little bit of stress, conifers do tend to chuck out some resin bleeds. But if you're seeing it a lot of them, and you're seeing those resin tubes in particular, that's maybe when you'd think a bit more about, okay, maybe this is a tree that's under a lot of stress, or a tree that might have a bark beetle. Yeah, they can come, this could be potentially from mechanical damage or something like that as well. So I spoke a little bit about lesions that can be found under the bark if you've got the bleeds, but you can also see them here. So on the left, this is a really characteristic diamond-shaped lesion around the side shoot of an ash tree. And this is ash dieback, and it's the kind of definitive way you would identify ash dieback is finding this diamond-shaped lesion. And you can see these on younger trees and the younger shoots. They come out this kind of bruising colour, and you'll find lesions on many different species as well if they've got a pathogen activity. But sometimes when the tree gets a bit more mature, it can be harder to see the lesions. And you can see here, this is an example of what it would look like under the bark. So you've got the healthy tissue, which is this white colour, and then you've got the tissue that's diseased and is dying, which has gone this kind of orange colour. And then cankers. Cankers is a very, I guess, loose term that can be used to describe any kind of disformation or any kind of injury to the bark. And this one on the left is again one of my favorite ones. It's been caused by a bacterial pathogen, and as it's kind of eating into the tree, the bark on the outside is still growing a little bit, and it makes it look like something just kind of burst out of the tree. So I think that's always quite cool to see. Again, it's not great for the tree, but it's quite a fascinating one. It causes these big holes within the tree. And if you see, this is ash again. If you see one of these in the field, you tend to get lots of them. So you get lots of these big open cankers up the tree. That cankers is quite a term you can use for any kind of, I was going to say any kind of cankering, but that doesn't help, does it? Any kind of disformation of the bark, or any splitting or cracking or holes like this. And then this one here on the right is another type of canker, and we'd normally describe this as like a thumb depression. So it looks like you've pressed your thumb into this shoot, and that tends to be caused by a pathogen, a Nectria pathogen. And that's again quite characteristic. So you can see how describing these things and taking photos can help you actually eventually come to a diagnosis, because some of these are very characteristic and some of them aren't, and some of them we need to investigate more. Another one to look out for is epicormic growth, and this is kind of growth that shoots out of the main stem or the big stems but isn't kind of part of the branching pattern of the tree. And it's often produced by trees in response to stress. So if they have a branch that has been infected by a pathogen, it's no longer serving them, they can't photosynthesize very well using the leaves on that branch, they will then try and compensate for that by shooting out lots of epicormic growth. This is one to be a bit careful with, because some species do this anyway. So lime, as you probably all know, will put out epicormic growth around the base. And we see this quite regularly, and you'll see the council of the street trees going and chopping it all off because they're afraid it might get in the way of the road. But in species where it's not as common, epicormic growth can be a really good sign to look out for, to know, okay, something's going on within this tree. And again, it's not always going to be a disease, it might be something abiotic. It means the tree is under stress, and this is its response to that, is trying to put out all these new shoots to get the energy it needs. And then just some signs of bark borers as well. So I showed you those wet resin tubes, but you might also find exit holes. It's important to know that we do have a lot of bark borers that are native to our ecosystems. They're important parts of our ecosystems. They are, I guess, for want of a better term, meant to be here. But we also have some that we've accidentally introduced and can cause more damage. But also bark borers tend to attack stressed trees. They're the ones they go for. That's their part of role in the ecosystem, as they're recyclers essentially. When the trees start to get stressed, they will go in and turn the trees over and help put them back into the wider environment and let another tree come up. So you might find, if you've got a lot of bark borer activity, that maybe that tree isn't the healthiest one. You don't want to collect seed from it because it might not be best suited to the environment it's in. And a lot can be said for most of these symptoms I've shown you. If you're looking for the healthiest trees for the best seed, these are kind of the signs and symptoms that you want to look out for, including these exit holes. These can be very small. If you've got a couple, maybe won't want too much, but if you've got quite a lot of exit holes, then that's a sign that the tree is stressed. And at that point, you're going to start seeing crown reduction anyway. And then if you're at quite an advanced stage of decline within that tree, you might be able to peel off the bark. It'll probably be starting to peel off, and underneath you'll see these galleries. And this is where the female has come in, dug this gallery here, laid the eggs, and then all these ones coming out to the side are the young larvae that have hatched. And you can see as they slowly get bigger, their galleries get bigger. So just a quick few photos show you some of these symptoms in younger trees to show you that it can be harder actually to see them. The symptoms are the same, just often harder and can look a bit different. So these arrows are pointing to some lesions. Again, you've got to look pretty close. This is healthy tissue, but below you can see the tissue that is suffering. And again, it's pointing to lesions. So it starts in C, D showing it bigger, and E bigger again. And then again, some kind of cankering here. You've got this kind of dieback. I'm not sure what pathogen this is, but it almost looks a bit bacterial. It's gone kind of really dark and mushy. And then you've got the lesion inside, and then again one of these Nectria thumb indents that you can find as well. And then some more symptoms on roots this time. So these symptoms such as lesions aren't confined just to the above parts of the plant, and on smaller trees you actually have the opportunity, a greater opportunity, to look at the roots of your plant. So you can find lesions, these blackened lesions here, and then this is fungal mycelium. So they peel back the bark and you can see the mycelium growing up, and it looks like a honey fungus. And I'll talk a bit about honey fungus in one of the slides that I've got coming up. So that's been a bit of a whirlwind tour of signs and symptoms of ill health in trees. And as I've hopefully kind of shown, they can sometimes be really indicative of a certain pest or pathogen, and at other times it can be a bit more kind of, it could be many things. So let's collect some information and go back to the books. I'm going to talk about a few particular pests and pathogens that you might want to be aware of in these next few slides. First, I just put this in to show you kind of the key biotic causes of tree health problems. We've already spoken quite a lot about fungi. I've also mentioned Phytophthora. Phytophthora aren't a fungi. That's often a common confusion. They're Oomycete, which is like this weird kind of group that's more closely related to algae and are often called water molds. Viruses. I'm going to talk about viruses actually, but trees get viruses too, although we don't know much about them. Bacteria, invertebrate pests I've mentioned as well. Nematodes I've not really touched upon much. Again, outside of kind of agriculture, nematodes aren't really well known as to how they kind of could influence disease within trees, but there's one that's quite emerging now, which is called bleached leaf disease. And then I'm not going to talk about parasitic plants or mammal pests. So I told you I'd talk about Ramorum, and I think it's definitely worth you being aware of Phytophthora ramorum, which is again another Phytophthora pathogen, and it's causing quite a lot of problems in the UK at the moment. It was introduced, it's not considered a native pathogen to the UK, and it includes many species as its host. In the UK, actually, it's mainly found at kind of larch being the most susceptible, which is not one of your priority species within this project, but other woody species on the list include holly, yew and gilder rose. It is worth being aware because it's a quarantine organism. So if you do find when you're out in the field, or hopefully not in your nursery, any symptoms that you think could be Phytophthora ramorum, you definitely need to report it, and I'll tell you how to do that at the end. If you're in kind of the westerly zone within England, or if anyone here is from Wales or Scotland, it's worth definitely being more aware. This is where Phytophthora tends to do best because it likes water, and it's the wetter part of the UK, this kind of region going up the west, but we are seeing it moving east now, and we're getting more reports, especially up in the northeast. So what does it look like? The most classic symptom for Phytophthora ramorum, and I'll just go back to this slide quickly so it shows a better photo, is this blackened lesion going down the mid vein of the leaf. And you can see it here as well on rhododendron. When it first came, we thought, wait, it might answer our rhododendron problems, but sadly it hasn't. So it goes down the mid vein like that. It will cause lesions. Again, you won't see these unless you're removing the bark, which you shouldn't be really unless it's your tree. But it causes also bleeds, and you can see some bleeds here, and this is where someone's taken a sample, some blackened bleeds. And then you can see some Phytophthora bleeds here as well, which is characteristic of all species. But if you see this, I'd encourage you to report it anyway, regardless of whether you think it's ramorum or not. So we're seeing these blackened ink staining, as I mentioned earlier. And then this is horse chestnut, and then you've got the black kind of coloration here, and we've got cracking as well. So we know something's definitely going on within this tree, and we suspect a Phytophthora species. Some more bleeds to show you just a variety of what it can look like. And then here on alder, which again is suffering quite badly from a Phytophthora called Phytophthora elni, especially up in Scotland. And then I'll keep moving because I'm aware I want to give you lots of time for questions. Honey fungus, I assume most of you are aware of. It's quite polyphagous. It affects lots of different woody species. It can be found across the wider environment. It tends to go for stressed trees again. So if you're finding a tree that's got a lot of honey fungus, it probably indicates that it's stressed and not doing best it can in that environment. Symptoms are these kind of black bootlaces, which are the rhizomorphs of the fungi. You won't always find these, depending on the species of honey fungus. Sometimes you can find white mycelial fans, and maybe not a surprise, but they smell very strongly of mushroom. So if you find these white mycelial fans and you give them a sniff and it's like, yeah, that's definitely a mushroomy smell, in likelihood is it's honey fungus. And then at certain times of the year as well, and certain climatic conditions, you will find their fruiting bodies, and you can see why they're called honey fungus, is because they're a honey colour. Don't need to report this one, but it's worth being aware of. If you've got it in your nursery, you definitely need to address that, because for young trees it can be very problematic. And yeah, I'd stay away from collecting material if your tree that you're looking at has a honey fungus. And that's the white mycelial fans that I was talking about that smell like mushroom. Sounds a silly thing to say, but not all mushrooms would smell exactly how you'd expect mushrooms to smell. I did set a talk about viruses, and the reason I'm bringing these into the picture is because they can be seed transmitted, and I'm aware that you guys probably collect your own seed. Viruses, we don't know much about them in trees, and there's currently a project on the go to try and address that. But their symptoms are very characteristic of viruses, and I find they're actually quite easy to identify because of that. So they tend to be this yellow mottling, but what you will find with a virus is that will be flushed to the leaf. So you might find other yellows and leaf spots and stuff like that, but it can kind of bump a leaf, and if it's mites, you'll get the bump. With a virus, it will kind of be this almost quite pretty yellow kind of mottling, but the leaf will be flush. It won't be distorting it too much. You can get some leaf roll viruses. Typically in trees, these are the kind of symptoms that we see, is this yellow mottling. This is one that we do know is in the UK, MRAV, which stands for Mountain Ash Associated, no, I've missed an A. Anyway, it's a mountain ash ring spot virus. It's got a very, very long name, but mountain ash ring spot is probably all you need to know. And this kit mainly goes for mountain ash, but it will also infect other sorbus species. So that includes like white beam and wild service, although that's not regularly seen. And then there's another one as well called apple mosaic virus, which is this one here, which does infect many broadleaf trees as well. Again, these are not common hosts, but it's still worth you being aware of these viral symptoms. I wanted to just quickly put this one in, which is one of hazel, which is a bacterial pathogen. I know these photos are not of hazel. I was struggling to find good photos. But one thing to look out for, especially because you guys are collecting seeds, is these blackened lesions on a hazel nut. And if you see those, that one should be reported as well. And you can get these leaf spotting. But the main thing to look out for, and you'll probably notice because of the nature of what you're doing, is these black lesions on your hazelnuts. And then fire blight is one that I assume a lot of you are aware of, especially if you're gardeners. And again, of interest here is the sorbus species, white beam and wild service tree. And this is also caused by a bacterium. And the symptoms of fire blight, they're quite characteristic, but they sometimes take a certain eye to really know. You can get these, especially when it's been wet. So if you had a lot of wet weather, a lot of rain, you'll get these kind of slimy, really horrible exudations coming out of some of the lesions. I always find bacterial pathogens tend to just cause like more slimy symptoms within the lesions and within the tree. And then this dieback of the foliage as well. This one again is reportable. So if you see it, it's got some more photos. So it's called fire blight because people say it can look like a fire's gone up the side of the host plant. So in this case, trees. because you'll get just kind of like this southern death and wilting that tends to go quite black up the side of the tree, and that's where the name comes from. So that's always quite stuck with me as something to look out for in fire blight, and you'll get kind of these lesions and general necrosis. So what to do about your findings very quickly. If you're finding trees in the wider environment that you are particularly concerned about and you want to let people know about, then the place to go is Tree Alert. This is a service run by the Forestry Research. And you basically go in, you put in as much information as you can. So you're going to need a grid reference, you're going to need photos, record the symptoms, encode where they are on the tree, and all of these things I've been talking about. Send it off, and one of their entomologists or pathologists will have a look at it and let you know what they think. So this is for if you really kind of think, yeah, those symptoms aren't good, they're very severe, and I'm worried about this tree, and I need to let someone know about it. If it's in a nursery setting, Tree Alert is for the wider environment for trees only as well. If it's in a nursery setting and you're worried about maybe a pest or pathogen within your nursery, you should contact your local APHA inspector. If you don't know who they are, you can find them via this generic email, and I just found this on the government website. Especially if it's something that you think might be quarantine. So one of the ones that I've said is reportable, and they will be able to also advise. And just some further resources. I know this has been a lot of information. It's just really to give you a flavour and then direct you to good places to find out more. So a really good website, because I used to be involved in this project, is Observatory. And that includes free PDFs, field identification guides for some key pests and pathogens. Half of the ones that they have identification guides for are not yet in the UK because they're aiming to act as an early warning system, but half of them are. And on the website, on the page, it clearly says whether they are or aren't. And you'll be able to find some really good ID guides. And these contain a lot of photos, and also photos of lookalikes as well, to help you understand what it might be also. So that's really helpful. And they're free, so go check those out. The Forestry Research website is actually really good as well. They've got pest and disease resources page, and they list a lot of the key ones of trees within the UK that they're interested in. So again, another thing you can do, if you know the species of the tree, you've already kind of narrowed it down quite a bit. And then I'm not on commission, but this book is also really good. It's a bit out of date now, but it's still the most comprehensive one that we have available in the UK. I've got it here. And this is really useful because what it does is you go by species. So I've just landed on the page of juniper. So you'd go to juniper and then you would look at your symptoms. So have I got a root rot? Have I got symptoms on my bark? Have I got symptoms on my foliage? And then it will tell you what it thinks might be causing it and send you to those pages to have a look. So I will finish there. Hopefully that's been really interesting, or just a little bit interesting, and I will pass back to Gemma, who hopefully might have some questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. Fascinating. We did have a question about juniper, pests and pathogens particular to juniper. I popped a link into the chat to a forest research pamphlet on juniper and Phytophthora. Is there anything else you would like to add?
On juniper, so yeah, a key one on juniper at the moment is Phytophthora ostracedri, which I think will be what Gemma has probably linked to. So this is a really severe introduced pathogen, and this is why community tree nurseries is so important. We don't want to keep introducing new severe pests and pathogens that our trees are naive to, and that's why we need to grow our trees in the UK. So yeah, the Phytophthora ostracedri was also an accidental introduction, and it's really threatening our remaining juniper populations that have already been really influenced by land use within our uplands. And it's a root pathogen and it kills the trees pretty fast. So the symptoms of this you'll find on that link that Gemma's put in, and it's one to look out for. And you definitely shouldn't be collecting any material really from kind of juniper that is shows infected populations. And if you go on the Forest Research website, you'll be able to see where they are. If you are working with juniper, you do need to be really careful when it comes to forestry surgery. And there's some guidance online from the Forestry Commission and Forestry Research about how to work with juniper material. So please do check that out and be really cautious about it, because the last thing we want to do is introduce the forestry surgery into juniper populations that don't yet have it.
Thank you. So a question from Kate is, powdery mildew in oak trees curable? I have a 3-year-old tree with it. And Kate, you can take yourself off mute if you want to add any more information to that.
Hi. Yeah, I've got five trees. They're all 3 years old, and they've all got it. And they've had it since they've had leaves, so I'm not really sure how that works.
Yeah, so it's the pathogen, with it being a fungus, is hard to control because it's just in the wider environment. So they're not going to continually have powdery mildew. The leaves will drop off, and then the next year it will reinfect the leaves, if that makes sense, at the time of year where powdery mildew starts sporulating, sending out the spores, which tends to be towards the end of summer. There's no cure really for it. It shouldn't impact your tree health too much unless it's in combination with other stressors. So if you find your oaks are also suffering from drought or also being heavily defoliated or anything like that, then you might find powdery mildew as another stressor on top of that can then cause the tree to decline. But on its own, I wouldn't worry too much. I know it can be quite unsightly and worrying, but I'm hoping at 3 years they should be okay. It can be more, again, like everything, it can be more damaging on younger trees. You could try cleaning up the leaf litter or something like that to try and reduce the amount of powdery mildew in the environment once the leaf falls off. But I wouldn't worry too much. But now I'm afraid it's not one that we kind of have any cures for, and it goes for most actual tree diseases. Yeah. We don't tend to have cures for them. The most important thing is to try and prevent them spreading, moving around, and also to reduce the amount of trees we're importing into the UK and grow more here, because then that's likely to bring new pests and pathogens.
So I should keep them away from other trees.
Where are they? Are they kind of near trees you're growing, or? They're
currently all in pots, but there's bigger oak trees that are like established, probably over 100 years old nearby. So I wouldn't want to infect all of them.
They've probably already been exposed to it, to say if they're nearby. Powdery mildew is just everywhere,
okay.
To be honest. So I wouldn't, I like your thinking, great, it's definitely the right way to think, but I think for that pathogen,
you probably had it.
Yeah, I mean, a mature oak tree will be fine with powdery mildew, to be honest.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a question which I think is asking how to identify a healthy Quercus robur English oak tree. So this is related to a research project in Westman's Wood, Dartmoor, taking cores from oak trees. And again, if you want to add any more information to that, please do unmute. But yes, how do you recognize a healthy
That
oak
was
tree?
it, yeah. A healthy, it's kind of the opposite. It's be the ability to identify healthy oak trees. Have you got any recommendations on that?
Westman's Wood, is that the rainforest?
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, I recognise the name. Rainforest trees, it's different, isn't it? Because they tend to be smaller and more gnarly and have a lot of lichens and bryophytes, so you can't see their bark and stuff like that. Healthy ones in the rainforest, I would say, looking at their kind of crown condition, any kind of sudden changes in that, any sudden leaf loss in the summer. It's not an area I particularly specialise in, is rainforest zone trees, which can look quite different, because you won't be able to see their lesions, I assume, or anything like that to get to the bark. But if you know the trees, you see them regularly, you know kind of what they normally look like. If you see any sudden changes in that, oaks can reorganize their crown, especially as they get older. So they might kind of bring one bit in a little bit and put it up here, or just bring it in a little bit anyway. So any kind of smaller changes, I wouldn't worry about too much. But if you're seeing kind of lots of leaf loss or really dramatic alterations of the crown, then I would worry. Oak declines have a complex disorder called Oaks have a complex disorder called oak decline. I'm currently writing a paper on it, so it's just like all I think about. And they basically will have like accumulation of stressors that can cause them to decline, but the main symptom that you're looking for in that is crown condition again. So I'd say for oaks, definitely just keep an eye on their crowns.
Okay, thank you.
So Anthony has suggested spraying diluted milk for limiting the effect of mildew on oak.
Okay.
Nice tip.
Yeah, I've not heard of that one, but
there's a few more questions in the chat, but Chris Perry has his hand up. So did you want to ask a question, Chris?
Yes. Hello, Rebecca. I wondered if you'd witnessed or know of any very serious problems within a tree nursery of 1 to 2 year old seedlings, please.
Within tree nurseries, of any species, Chris, or?
Yeah, native.
Native.
Mainly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think within tree nurseries, the most serious issue to manage can be the phytophthora, managing kind of the watering regime, and the spread of phytophthora in nurseries tends to be one that we hear about the most. So there's advice online around kind of your waste management, managing your waste, your compost, managing how you water. But I think there's a webinar coming up on biosecurity, which will hopefully cover that quite a lot. But for nurseries, I definitely think you should be thinking about phytophthora for sure, and making sure your water management is really spot on to stop them spreading and to stop them entering.
Thanks.
So I've got a question about, is there a recommended sanitizer for cleaning boots, trays and tools? Yeah,
definitely. So again, not on commission, just one I personally use and I've used and recommend we use within the trust. It's one called Clean Kill. So literally clean and then kill is one word. This is a safer one for your boots, especially because some of the sanitizers can be quite degrading to your boots, so can iterate the glues and cause your soles to fall off. And some of them I've heard of actually just like eating the soles of boots gradually because there can be quite harsh chemicals. So Clean Kill is one that we tend to use for boots and kind of PPE wear. For tools, you can use Clean Kill as well, but some people will use something called Propeller, which is the one you don't want to use on your boots. And you need to be careful with your kosh here because I think it's flammable. But Propeller you can use for your tools as kind of a bit of a harder core sanitizer for tools that you're using potentially to deal with diseased material.
I think you want to avoid inhaling Propeller as well. So yeah, you need to read the instructions carefully.
Yeah, make sure you've got your kosh sheets for everything. Yes. You're following them. Even for Clean Kill, there's a kosh.
So Celia is asking, is there any problem with old tree trunks that might be infected being left near other trees? So presume.
I think it depends on the pathogen. I mean, if you've got a quarantine disease, the authorities will be telling you to remove any kind of material like that and burn it. Obviously, dead wood is really important to have within our environment, within our woodlands for the biodiversity that uses them. It's hard to say. It's probably a case by case basis on that one. With ash now, because ash dieback is so prevalent, we leave ash wood within our woodlands for the benefits that the dead wood has. So it kind of does depend. If you've got the quarantine pathogens, the authorities will be directing the landowner anyway on how to deal with their felled trees or any dead wood that's associated with the species that's hosting the pathogen. Yeah, that's a hard one to answer kind of with one. Sorry.
Got an interesting question about what natural predators can we encourage to tackle some of these issues. Well known that hoverflies and ladybirds munch on aphids. Are there any natural ways of tackling leaf miners or any other diseases?
Yeah, so biocontrol basically is a really big area at the moment, especially as we get stricter regulations on pesticides, and also we don't tend to use pesticides on trees in the wider environment. So there's a few kind of interesting projects going on at the moment, trying to there's one in, I think it's the Netherlands, trying to encourage birds to eat oak session moth caterpillars, and there's a few biocontrol releases that have gone on. So they've released some parasites of orange chestnut gore wasp and a great spruce bark beetle. I think normally what the kind of assumption is and what they find is that for the introduced pest and pathogen, they don't have any natural enemies, and that can include predators, parasites, and those that compete with them within the ecosystem, so space, food, etc. That's why they do so well, and that's why they affect our trees so much. So often you'll find the authorities looking to find something they can introduce. Obsessionary moth quite happily came with its own solution when we imported accidentally, I say we, not the Woodland Trust, but in the UK, when we imported obsessionary moth on oak trees, it came with a Carcilia fly, which is a parasite of it. So they've just been trying to bolster the populations of that fly. Things you can do yourselves is, I guess, just try and keep your trees as healthy as possible with a nice natural ecosystem is the best thing you can do to make them really resilient to pests and diseases.
So we've got 5 more minutes. So Joe was asking about a 2-year-old downy birch that seems to be dying off, going very, very twiggy from the top of the tree, had rust last year. I'm assuming this has weakened them and made them vulnerable, presumably to other infections.
Yeah, I would follow that assumption. Rust on its own can not be too damaging, but when the tree is younger, same with powdery mildew, the younger the tree, it could be potentially causing some damage and making it more vulnerable. Without kind of seeing the tree and the conditions, I probably couldn't give any more information.
Alex is asking, can you say something about the difference between trying to keep trees healthy and rewilding projects where you're leaving everything to its own balance, so natural function?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a really good question. And as I tried to explain maybe badly at the beginning, is that obviously we have our own ecosystem functions, and as you talk about rewilding, kind of everything finding its own balance is really important. We have a lot of pests and pathogens that are native to the UK. You know, they're meant to be within our ecosystems. They're a really important part of that functioning. A lot of what I've spoken about today has been introduced pest or pathogen that can cause more damage, and some of them are quarantine, which means that we legally have to do something about it because they're super damaging, either to the environment, the trees, or sometimes economically if it's a forestry pathogen. And I think for you guys, when you're collecting seed in a nursery environment, you don't want to facilitate the spread of anything, really, do you? Because you might be moving it from somewhere it's not currently present into a new area. But I totally always try to strike that balance of, but we still need pests and pathogens within our ecosystems because they're an important part of the functioning. So yeah, I think it depends on what you're doing. For nurseries and for collecting seed, I think we always have a more cautious approach because we don't want to be responsible for spreading anything. But within the wider environment, so for us at the Trust, within our woodlands, we don't manage pests or pathogens unless we have to because it's a quarantine and we legally have to do something about it, or if it's a tree safety problem. So that pest or pathogen is normally the pathogen is causing that tree to become unsafe and potentially in falling distance of a road or a footpath, and then we remove it. Otherwise, we let them find their own balance.
And people have been posting suggestions of treatment for Phytophthora into the chat and other sanitizing sprays. So we'll try and capture that when we email you following the webinar with Rebecca's slides and a feedback form. Would anybody else like to ask any further questions? If you want to pop your hand up, otherwise I think we'll wrap up. That's been fantastic, Rebecca. Thank you so much.
It's good to see those suggestions. Thank you. As I said, we don't tend to manage them much in the Trust, so I'm control is not my expert area, I'm afraid. I'm aware sometimes the control can be different in a nursery environment. You have more of a controlled environment, so sometimes you can use these things, whereas in woodlands it is very different environment.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you everyone. I'll let you get back to your evenings. And do follow the Fellowship of the Trees Eventbrite page for the next events in February and March. Bye.